June 11th, 323 before Christ. Darkness was falling over Babylon. Even the cool breath of the Euphrates was not enough to cool that night. In the deepest corner of the most magnificent city of the ancient world, a conqueror breathed his last. And he was only 32 years old. And what he left behind would fit neither in a tomb nor in a book. An empire stretching from the Balkans to India, from the yellow sands of Egypt to the endless steppes of Central Asia, an army that had never been defeated, and a single indelible name carved into the pages of history: Alexander the Great. But every great story has a small beginning. North of Mount Olympus, just beyond Greece, there was a small kingdom, Macedonia. The Greeks to the south called these people barbarians, looked down upon them. Yet in these lands, between the stone walls of the palace, a child was growing up. And his mother, Olympias, had been whispering to him since he was very young, "You are not ordinary. Your lineage traces back to the demigod Achilles, and your father's lineage goes back to Heracles, son of Zeus, father of the gods." These words were carved into the young Alexander's mind. They sank so deep they never left. As for his father, Philip II, history has mostly cast him in the role of a man living in the shadow of his great son. But this is not right. Philip transformed Macedonia into a power from nothing. For years he ran from war to war, secured his borders through political marriages, gained great wealth through gold mines, and ultimately brought all of Greece under his dominion except Sparta. Then he fixed his eyes on the east. There stood the vast Persian Empire, the greatest state structure history had ever seen, so powerful, so wealthy, that it could even buy the best soldiers of its enemies and add them to its army. Philip wanted to bring down this giant empire. First, he raised a son. Now look at this scene. A merchant came to the palace, wanting to sell a horse for the king. But this horse was so ill-tempered, so wild, that it let no one near it. Philip grew angry and gave the order to send it back. At that moment, young Alexander, standing in the corner of the palace, stepped forward. He said they were ruining a beautiful horse because of the men's incompetence, and that he himself would bring the horse to heel. His father raised his eyebrows. "You speak big words, there will be a punishment if you fail," he said. Alexander looked at his father. "Then I will pay for it myself," he said simply. He walked toward the horse, stopped, looked, and saw something no one else had noticed. The horse was afraid of its own shadow. He quietly turned the horse's face toward the sun. The shadow disappeared. He stroked its head, and with a single leap, he mounted its back. Everyone held their breath. The horse first grew agitated, then calmed down, then began to run. When he returned in an arc, everyone in the palace was celebrating. Philip had tears in his eyes. He looked at his son and said, "My son, find yourself another kingdom. Macedonia is too small for you." That horse was named Bucephalus, and it was always by Alexander's side throughout his campaigns, all the way to India. Then at the age of 13, a great meeting took place. Aristotle, one of the greatest philosophers the ancient world had produced, became Alexander's teacher. 3 years of philosophy, the art of rhetoric, statecraft, politics. This education gave Alexander a depth beyond the sword. He learned not only to fight, but to think, to persuade, to govern. And these qualities were perhaps the most important part of what made him unstoppable. At 16, he was declared regent in his father's absence and successfully suppressed the rebellion that broke out in that first year. When he turned 18, he commanded the left wing of the army at the Battle of Chaeronea. When the Macedonian right wing could not withstand the pressure and began to retreat, a great gap formed between the Athenian and Theban forces. Alexander moved at exactly that moment, plunged into that gap, and changed the course of the battle by outflanking the Theban forces from behind. All of Greece except Sparta was now under Macedonia's rule. The relationship between father and son was never easy. When Philip married the young Cleopatra, a speech was made on the wedding night. Attalus, who took the floor on behalf of the bride's family, prayed aloud to the gods for a legitimate royal child to be born from this marriage. So was Alexander not legitimate? The table tensed for a moment. Alexander hurled the cup in his hand at the man. Philip drew his sword and walked toward his son, but he was so drunk that he stumbled and fell to the ground. Alexander stared at his father for a long time. "While we are preparing to cross from Europe to Asia, we cannot cross from one couch to another," he said, and left the palace. Then that dark day came. There was a great ceremony in the city of Aegae. Philip was to appear before his people. Pausanias was waiting at the entrance of the theater. He had hidden an axe under his cloak. The moment Philip left his guards behind and advanced alone, Pausanias leaped upon him and brought down the axe. The officers intervened immediately, and Pausanias was killed there, but it was far too late for Philip. The 20-year-old Alexander became king. Rebellion everywhere. Suspicion everywhere. Antipater stepped forward, declared Alexander king before the nobles, and approval was obtained. Alexander moved immediately. He marched south before the unrest in the Greek cities could grow. When Thebes rebelled, he did not back down, entered the city, and razed it to the ground. This message spread from city to city. No one thought of rebellion again. It was the East's turn. 334 before Christ. As Alexander crossed the Dardanelles, he hurled his spear from the ship to the opposite shore and declared these lands conquered by the spear. These were the lands of Troy, the homeland of his great hero Achilles, the geography of the epics that nourished his soul. He visited his ancestors, offered sacrifices to the gods, and continued. When he united with Parmenion's 10,000 soldiers, his force totaled 46,500 men. The first great confrontation with the Persian army took place at the banks of the Granicus River. The Persians had taken positions on the eastern bank, waiting for the morning battle. Alexander made the decision to cross the river before dawn. The Persians were completely unprepared for this move. The fact that Macedonian spears were much longer than Persian spears determined the fate of the battle. Alexander himself fought in the very front lines, and it is reported that he struck Persian generals with his spear. The Persians were forced to retreat. Ephesus fell. Sardis fell. Then came Halicarnassus, known today as Bodrum. There he struggled. Massive walls, well-positioned forces, a rock-solid defense under the command of General Memnon. Months of fighting. Heavy losses. He took a significant portion of the city, but Persian forces on the royal island kept holding on. This siege remained a defeat in his eyes for the rest of his life. When he came to the city of Gordium, a legendary prophecy awaited him there. A complex knot binding the ox cart in the temple. Whoever untied it would become master of all Asia. Alexander tried, could not untie it. Then he drew his sword and cut it in two with a single stroke. "The Gordian knot is solved," he said. Rules could not imprison him. Closed roads could not stop him. Obstacles could not bend him. He always found another way out. 333 before Christ, October. And one of the most striking confrontations in history. Persian King Darius III was waiting at Issus with an army of approximately 100,000. Alexander had an army of 40,000. But Darius had made a mistake. He had chosen a narrow coastal strip. The movements of the Persian cavalry, which needed to maneuver on wide plains, would be greatly restricted here. Two armies faced each other on both sides of the Pius River. Persian archers unleashed a rain of arrows. The sound of arrows piercing bronze shields mingled with the voices of thousands of men piled one upon another. The place had truly turned into hell. The Macedonians were taking losses, but the phalanx was holding. When they crossed the river, a hand-to-hand struggle ensued. Greek mercenaries broke through the Macedonian line and plunged into the breach. Everything at that moment turned into an avalanche. Then Alexander moved. From the right wing, swiftly, directly toward Darius. Darius's brother and guard units tried to block the way, but Alexander was approaching fast. Darius looked. His eyes met Alexander's eyes. Two men, two worlds. And within that gaze, the fate of an empire was being weighed. Darius averted his eyes. And the great king of the Persian Empire, in the middle of his 100,000-strong army, abandoned the battlefield. 20,000 Persian soldiers had lost their lives that day. Alexander's losses were around 5,000. The mother, wife, and daughters of Darius were taken prisoner. Alexander did not harm them. Their dignity was respected. They would live exactly as they had lived in a Persian palace. Because Alexander knew not only how to fight, but also what to do after winning. He marched into the Levant. Arwad, Byblos, Sidon surrendered without a fight. When he came to Tyre, an entirely different scene awaited him. Tyre was on an island, 750 meters from the shore. They refused to surrender. Alexander had the old city of Tyre razed to the ground and had the rubble poured into the sea to build a causeway 60 meters wide. Wind became an obstacle. Depth became an obstacle. The rain of arrows from the walls became an obstacle. He overcame every obstacle. He lined up 224 ships from Cyprus and surrounding cities around the island. The island was besieged both from land and sea. 7 months later, Tyre fell. Gaza was taken. Jerusalem surrendered. The Sinai Desert was crossed, and Egypt was entered. The Egyptian people welcomed Alexander like a liberator. The Persians had not treated the people here well. Alexander entered Memphis, offered sacrifices in the name of the Egyptian gods. The people declared him pharaoh, called him the son of the sun, god Ra. This title suited Alexander very well. It was the sun symbol, held sacred by both Egyptians and Macedonians. He walked to the temple of Amun at the Siwa oasis, came face to face with the oracle. What he asked, what answer he received, remained a mystery. But it was said that he received the answers he desired. Then in the Nile Delta, he founded one of the longest-lived cities in history, Alexandria. 2,300 years later, it still lives by that name. 331 before Christ, October, Gaugamela. Darius had this time risked everything. An estimated 250,000 soldiers, elephants, war chariots with scythe blades, warriors brought from all corners of the world. Alexander had come with 47,000 soldiers. The desert dust was so thick that even historians could not fully see the details of the battle. But the result was clear. The Persian army was routed. Darius fled again. Babylon opened its gates. Susa surrendered without resistance. At Persepolis, he encountered one of the greatest treasures in history. 5,000 camels and 20,000 pack animals were brought from Babylon to transport it. The city was finally set on fire. Whether it was revenge for the Persians burning the Greek cities 150 years before, or something else, the answer to this question is still unknown. Darius was fleeing. Alexander was pursuing. But his closest man, Bessus, the satrap of Bactria, had other plans in mind. The king is fleeing. The empire is collapsing. Who gains most if the king dies? Darius was stabbed repeatedly and placed upon a cart to die. When Alexander came to his side, he found a man breathing his last. He gave him a funeral befitting kings. Then he went after Bessus, found him, had him tried, and executed. The last breath of the Persian Empire was thus cut off. And still he did not stop. Afghanistan, the Hindu Kush Mountains, Central Asia. In Sogdiana, rebels waging guerrilla warfare had inflicted heavy casualties for 2 long years. Eventually, the regional leaders surrendered and wished to wed their daughter Roxana to Alexander. Alexander accepted their request, both because he felt it in his heart and because he wanted to establish lasting peace in these lands. Then India. At the banks of the Hydaspes River, Indian commander Porus was waiting with 30,000 soldiers and an army of elephants. The monsoon rains were fierce. The river ran high. Alexander conducted a night operation. He secretly crossed the river 30 kilometers upstream and outflanked Porus from behind. The elephants became confused against the Macedonian archers and spearmen, and even began crushing their own forces. Porus was encircled and surrendered. Alexander asked him, "How do you wish me to treat you?" Porus raised his head. His voice had not broken. "As befits a king," he said. Alexander declared him king again, but the soldiers were now completely exhausted. They had been marching for years, fighting for years. They had missed their families. They refused to advance any further. Alexander retreated to his tent, spoke to no one for 3 days. Finally, he accepted. They would return. The return route passed through the Gedrosian desert, and in that desert, losses were suffered that would never have been given in battle. A terrible moment occurred at the siege of Multan. Alexander himself climbed the wall. The ladder collapsed. He was left alone. An arrow lodged in his chest, and he fell to the ground. Blood loss had nearly taken him from life. The entire army fell into panic. A silence of mourning descended, until he raised his hand from the tent and greeted his soldiers. At that moment, thousands of voices filled the entire field at once, some with joy, some with tears. 324 before Christ. Ecbatana. His closest friend, perhaps the person he loved most, Hephaestion, fell ill. The news came while Alexander was at the theater. He ran. It was already too late. He touched his friend's cold hand and remained for a long time. He mourned for 3 days, shaved his head, did not put a single morsel of food in his mouth. Then he poured his anger into war. He had a funeral ceremony worthy of the gods prepared for Hephaestion. He had an enormous funeral pyre constructed in Babylon. But before that pyre was finished, he himself would be laid to rest in Babylon. The oracles of Babylon had warned, "Do not enter the city, you will die." Alexander paid no heed. He was making great plans. A campaign into Arabia, new discoveries, new horizons. But a fever seized his entire body. It did not break for 10 days. His voice fell silent. His officers lined up to say farewell. Each took one last look from him. They asked to whom he was leaving his empire. Curatisto, to the strongest, 32 years old. A world in 12 years. His tomb still cannot be found today. Perhaps that is how it should be. Because some stories do not fit in a tomb. Some names do not live out their days beneath the earth, but within time itself. And Alexander's name is carved into the deepest places of history, written in indelible letters. Written thousands of years ago, but still being read. How did Alexander the Great conquer so much land in such a short time? Was it because he was powerful, or because he was intelligent? Let us meet in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, you can also watch my previous one. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the next video.